The wheels creaked and groaned beneath the weight of the wagon, each rotation a drumbeat counting down the moments of Lorna's life as she once knew it. Her bonnet, sun-bleached and dust-stained, shielded her face from the world, and perhaps more importantly, from herself. She hadn't taken it off since Amarillo, not even when she'd coughed blood on the roadside, not even when her fever burned high enough that she forgot her own name. Her uncle hadn't looked at her in days, not when she collapsed, not when she cried, not even when he completed the trade that delivered her into the hands of strangers. He'd sold her 5 sacks of cornmeal and a rusted rifle. That was her price. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't angry. There was no room left for outrage, only dust, silence, and the slow, hollow realization that she had ceased being a girl long before this moment. Somewhere between the night her mother died and the day the man with whiskey on his breath carved a scar from her temple to her jaw, Lorna had disappeared. What remained was something else, something quieter, something traded. They arrived at the Apache camp just before sundown. Golden light stretched across the ground like the last mercy of day. But it did not reach her. Her uncle spit into the dirt, slapped the back of the man waiting for them, and said in a half-muttered drawl, "Done deal?" He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say her name. She stepped off the wagon alone. Her legs shook under her, not from fear, but from exhaustion deeper than bone. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her throat was dry as ash. The skirt clung to her with sweat and dust. Her hands trembled. But still, she didn't cry. She'd stopped crying a long time ago. The man who stood before her was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. Tall, with shoulders like carved stone, and braids that fell heavy down his back. He hadn't spoken a word since she arrived. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't frowned. But he also hadn't touched her. Not like the others. Not like the ones who thought touching came with payment. Behind him, the tribe watched. Silent. Curious? No one moved closer. Lorna kept her head down. She didn't know what they expected. She didn't know what she was anymore. Certainly not a bride. Not with this face. Not with this past. She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't whole. She was just something broken enough to be bartered. And still, he didn't move. Didn't reach for her. Didn't drag her away. Instead, after a long pause, the Apache man stepped around her. Not behind to claim. Not in front to confront. But around, his footsteps slow. Deliberate. Steady. She froze. Her heart pounded in her ears. Then, softly, his hand touched her hair. She flinched, but it didn't hurt. It didn't feel like ownership. His fingers, callous but careful, lifted the strands of her tangled hair like they were fragile. And then he braided. Not quickly, not forcefully. He worked gently, as if the act itself was sacred. Not like a servant, not like a master. Like a priest, like a witness. Tears burned the corners of her eyes. But she didn't let them fall. She couldn't understand it. Why would someone do this? Why would someone treat a girl like her, scarred, silent, used with such reverence? Her voice cracked. "I know I'm not pretty," she whispered. "You don't have to pretend." Still, he said nothing. But when he finished the braid, he tied it off with a thin leather strip and stepped in front of her. His eyes met hers. Still unreadable, still quiet, but no disgust, no mockery, no hunger. Just presence. Someone behind him spoke. An older woman. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but carried meaning. "His name is Nashkoda," she said. "It means he speaks only when the spirit calls." Lorna looked up. Nashkoda nodded once. And in that gesture, in that silence, she understood something she never had before. She had not been purchased. She had been seen. And maybe, for the first time in her life, chosen. The sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the camp. Lorna stood still, braid swaying against her back, unsure what to do next. No one pulled her forward. No one shoved her away. The Apache people, like the land around them, seemed to wait not for her obedience, but her presence. It unsettled her. She was used to being pushed, ordered, silenced. This waiting was unfamiliar. Shuya, the older woman who had spoken Nashkoda's name, stepped forward. She did not bow. She did not smile in pity. She simply reached for Lorna's hand and held it. Her fingers were warm and dry and firm, like old wood that had survived many winters. "Come," she said. That was all. Lorna followed. They walked through the camp past woven lodges and smoke-threaded fires. Children peeked from behind blankets. Men sharpening arrows paused to glance. Some women, seated in quiet circles, looked up with unreadable eyes, neither cold nor welcoming, just curious. Lorna kept her head lowered. She didn't belong. Not yet. She didn't know if she ever would. Shuya led her to a small lodge on the edge of the encampment. Set apart but not isolated, the flap was lifted. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweet grass and ash. There were no chains, no locks, just a low fire and a woven mat. Sit, Shuya said gently. Lorna did. The older woman knelt beside her, brought over a shallow basin of water warmed by the hearth, and dipped a cloth in it. She began to clean Lorna's hands slowly, with care, not as a servant would, not as a healer would, but as a mother might. Lorna couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her without wanting something. Her throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Voice barely a whisper, Shuya looked up and tapped her own chest. "Shuyi," she said. Then she pointed at Lorna. Lorna hesitated. "Lorna." Shuya nodded, smiled, then reached behind the fire pit and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a carved bone comb, smooth and curved like a river bend. She placed it in Lorna's lap with quiet reverence. Lorna stared at it. The last time someone had given her something, it came with a price, a contract, a bruise, a silence. "What is this?" she asked. Shuya spoke slowly, choosing words Lorna might understand. "Where you go tonight," she said, tapping the comb. "You wear this tonight?" Lorna echoed, confused. Shuya didn't answer. She stood and stepped outside, calling something softly in Apache. Moments later, Nashkoda appeared in the doorway. His figure blocked the firelight, his presence quiet but steady. He didn't move toward her. He didn't say a word, but Lorna felt his gaze like heat against her skin. She looked down at the comb in her lap. "Am I being presented?" she asked the room. Her voice trembled. She'd heard stories. Traded women paraded like cattle, judged by strangers, claimed by those who offered the highest price. Please no, she thought. Not like this. But Nashkoda stepped inside. Slowly, he didn't speak. He didn't point. He reached instead for the braid he had made the day before and tapped it gently, then pressed his hand to her chest, just above her heart. Then he stepped back. Lorna sat frozen. That gesture, so simple, so soft, held more meaning than any vow. "You are not here to be taken. You are here to be seen." With Shuya's help, she rose and draped the cloth around her shoulders. They stepped out into the fading light. A semicircle of elders had formed around a low fire in the center of camp. They said nothing as she approached. Their eyes watched, measured, but did not judge. Nashkoda stood beside her, not before her, not as her owner, as her witness. An elder stepped forward, feathers swaying from his braids. He looked at Lorna, then at Nashkoda. Then he said a word Lorna did not understand. The entire circle echoed it. Shuya leaned close and whispered, "They say accepted." Lorna's breath caught. Not bought, not pitied, accepted. Her hands tightened around the comb. Nashkoda looked at her, and for the first time since she was branded, since she was silenced, since she was sold, Lorna felt something in her chest begin to unfold. Need, not for escape, not for rescue, but to become, to belong, to breathe. She looked at Nashkoda and whispered, "Why me?" He said nothing, but his stillness answered, "Because you didn't run." Lorna sat outside the small lodge, her knees tucked beneath her, the ceremonial cloth still wrapped over her shoulders. The fire in the center of the camp glowed low, more ember than flame, but its warmth carried, flickering soft light over the gathering shadows. The comb Nashkoda had given her rested in her lap. It felt heavier than it looked, heavier because of what it meant. No one had ordered her to stay in the circle after the elder spoke. No one chained her to a stake or watched her with suspicion. She could leave, walk into the trees, and never return, and no one would stop her. But she stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because something in her chest whispered, "Stay still. Don't run this time." Beside her, Shuya ground dried roots with a stone pestle, humming low, almost like a prayer. Now and then, a child tiptoed past. They stared, but not cruelly, just curiosity. Small and wide-eyed, Lorna offered a smile to one girl, awkward, tentative. The girl ducked behind a woven screen but giggled as she disappeared. The smile stayed on Lorna's lips longer than she expected. The air was cooling. Pine smoke mingled with the scent of ash and earth. Everything smelled of something old, something rooted. She felt a shift behind her before she heard it. Soft leather brushing stone. A presence. Nashkoda, she didn't need to turn to know it was him. He walked slowly, not as a stalker, but as one honoring the moment. He moved around the fire, taking a place across from her, sitting with legs crossed and spine straight. He wore a vest lined with fur now, and his hair was tied loosely at the nape, but his silence remained. Patient, unpressured. "Hold." Then he began. He reached for a stick and started drawing in the dirt between them. Lorna watched. Curved lines, arcs, anchors, shapes she didn't recognize, but that felt meaningful, like a language not made of letters, but of memory, of belief. What is it? She whispered. Shuya leaned over and murmured, he honors the moment. What moment? Shuya looked at her with a strange, soft smile. You sat by the fire. Lorna's throat tightened. That's all. It is everything, Shuya said. It is a prayer. You did not run. You accepted the warmth and the burden. Nashkoda tapped one of the lines. Shuya translates, the old path is ending. Another tap. The girl is not ash. Another, the scar is not shame. It is a warning. Lorna's hand flew up to her cheek, brushing the line that split her face in two. She didn't know whether the tears rose from beauty, or grief, or both. But she let them come this time, just a few, silent. Nashkoda's gaze never wavered, but he made no move to close the distance. He simply reached into a small pouch and tossed something across the fire. It landed softly in her lap. Lorna opened the cloth and found a comb, carved from bone, smooth as riverstone and shaped like a crescent moon. A single symbol was etched deep near the end. What does it mean? She asked. Shuya answered without hesitation. Becoming. Lorna clutched the comb, her fingers trembling. The last time someone had handed her something, it had been a contract she didn't sign, a promise she didn't understand, a collar in paper form. But this was not obligation. It was invitation. Nashkoda stood. So did she. He didn't reach for her, didn't command, but he lifted his hand, palm outward, and for the first time, he spoke a single word. Tomorrow. Shuya smiled. He will show you where the water sings. Lorna's breath caught, not because of where they would go, but because she realized something for the first time in years. She was thirsty, not for water, for gentleness, for something sacred, for tomorrow. Before the sun crested the horizon, Shuya pressed a bundle into Lorna's hands. Inside were strips of dried meat, the soft cloth, and the bone comb, wrapped as carefully as if it were glass. Shuya didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. You are not returning the same. Nashkoda was waiting by the edge of the trees. 2 horses stood beside him, one tall and strong, the other smaller. Gentle-eyed, Lorna paused at the sight, unsure of where she belonged between the 2 animals. But Nashkoda simply nodded to the smaller one. She mounted with his quiet help, his touch brief and unobtrusive. Still, when his hand left her waist, the warmth of it remained. They rode in silence. No destination was named, no reasons given. The forest unfolded slowly around them, tall pines swaying above, the wind whispering in voices Lorna almost thought she could understand. Shafts of morning light broke through in narrow beams, like the world had been cracked open just wide enough for her to slip inside. It was the first time she'd been outside a camp, a cage, or a man's shadow without fear curling in her gut. Nashkoda rode ahead, but not far. Every few minutes, he glanced over his shoulder to make sure she followed. He didn't speak, didn't fill the air with instructions or reassurances. He simply let her breathe, and for Lorna, that was everything. After an hour, she heard it. At first, it was faint, just a hint of melody beneath the birdsong and hoofbeats. But then it grew louder, clearer, not just water, music, like the land itself was humming. They reached a break in the trees, and suddenly, the canyon opened. Before her lay a pool, wide, still, deep green, and above it, a narrow waterfall slid down a wall of red rock like silver hair. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it filled the air, steady, calming, sacred. Lorna gasped. She couldn't help it. It sings, she whispered. Nashkoda dismounted, tying his horse to a branch, and then turned to her, not offering his hand, but opening it, palm up, as if to say, I will walk beside you, not lead you. She took it. Her feet met the ground with a hush of pine needles. They walked to the water's edge. He knelt and dipped his fingers in, then touched them to his chest. Then again, this time pressing them lightly to hers. She said nothing, but something inside her chest moved. He motioned for her to sit. She obeyed. Then, gently, he reached behind her and took the comb from her lap. At first, she stiffened. The last man who touched her hair had done it to control her. But Nashkoda didn't pull or twist. He unraveled the braid he had made days earlier and began combing through the tangles slowly, reverently. Every stroke felt like a sentence spoken in a language older than words. Not grooming, not possession, storytelling. She closed her eyes. Her body began to release something she didn't know she'd been holding. Fear, maybe, or the belief that she was not allowed to be tended to. When he finished, he began to braid again. This one looser, softer. And then she felt it. The slide of something into her hair. A feather. She opened her eyes. Nashkoda was kneeling nearby, watching the waterfall, his expression unreadable. She whispered, "Why me?" Not expecting an answer, but he surprised her. "Because you didn't cry when they traded you." It was the first time she heard his voice. Steady, carved from stillness. She froze. He looked at her then, and she no longer saw just a warrior. She saw a man who had been waiting for this moment, for her silence to be worth breaking. Her hand rose slowly to the feather. "You heard me?" she said. He nodded once, and the water kept singing. They returned to the village just as the sky turned the color of bruised plums and wine. Lorna's braid swayed behind her, the feather light as breath against her back. No one spoke as they passed through the woven lodges. But people turned, faces lifted, not with suspicion, with awareness. Something had changed. She walked differently now, not taller, not prouder, but less folded in, as though a weight had been pulled from her ribs and replaced with something solid. Her feet made different sounds on the earth. She was no longer sneaking through life, she was arriving. Shuya met them at the fire circle and nodded once. The kind of nod that said, "I see you, even if you don't see it yet." That night, Lorna couldn't sleep. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of his voice saying, "Because you didn't cry." Full of water music. Full of questions she hadn't known how to ask, and answers that came wrapped in gestures instead of words. She stepped outside and walked to the fire in the center of camp. A few embers still glowed. She knelt and wrapped her arms around her knees. She expected the night to stay quiet, but a familiar rhythm stirred behind her. Nashkoda. He didn't speak. He simply sat beside her, matching her stillness. "Like always, I used to sit like this," she said softly. "Back home, before everything, Mama would sing. Papa would clean his rifle. My brother would pretend pebbles were bullets. It was a good kind of silence then." She paused. Then came the sickness, and the selling, twice. Once to a man who wanted a wife. Once to a man who wanted anything. Her hands clenched the earth. "The scar came after I said no." Nashkoda reached into a small leather pouch and pulled something wrapped in deerskin. He opened it gently. Inside was a long, narrow pipe, carved with old symbols. He touched the end of it, whispered a word in Apache. Then, with deliberate grace, he gestured to her. "You want me to hold it?" she asked. He nodded. She took it. It felt warm, though it hadn't been near the flame. He drew two curved lines in the dirt, one large, one small, arcing inward like crescent moons facing each other. Then he pointed to one, then her, the other, then himself. "It means we face each other," she whispered. His silence told her she was right. She placed the pipe gently in the space between the symbols. Bridging the arcs, he drew in a breath and said, "Before this fire, I am not a warrior. I am not a man who takes—" Her eyes stung. "Then what are you?" He met her gaze across the flickering light. "A man who waits." Her breath caught. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to ask if the waiting was over. But instead, she said, "Then I'll sit here with you until you're ready to stop." He nodded once. And together, they watched the fire die into the dark. Two souls who had burned alone for too long, now warming quietly, side by side. It was still early when the sharp whistle cut through the morning. Low, controlled, urgent. The village froze, then moved. Warriors stepped from lodges like a ripple beneath the ground. No panic, just purpose. Lorna dropped the herbs she'd been sorting and stood. Shuya grabbed her wrist. "Stay behind me." Then dust, hoofbeats. And on it, him, Boone Holloway, the man who had tried to brand her. Her stomach dropped like a stone into cold water. He hadn't changed. Same twisted grin, same rotted teeth, same eyes that looked at women like currency. "Well," he called, smiling wide. "Didn't think I'd find my runaway bride this far out. Traded fair and square. I did." Nashkoda stepped forward, still calm. But the air around him shifted, a warning. "She's mine," Boone said, pointing to her. "Bought her proper in Lubbock. Paid good whiskey for her. She ran. I came to take her back." The Apache people murmured. Low and angry, Nashkoda said nothing, but his eyes went to Lorna. Not to stop her, to ask. She stepped forward. Not behind him, beside him. "He's lying," she said. Voice loud enough to carry. "He didn't marry me. He bought me, branded me, called it discipline." She pulled down her sleeve, showed them the scar was no longer something to hide. Boone's grin faltered. "She's property," he barked. "Doesn't matter what she says." A spear dropped in the dust near his feet, thrown by a boy no older than 10. Not a threat, a lie. Lorna turned to Nashkoda. "Let me speak." He nodded. She turned to Boone. "You silenced me once, and I wore that shame under a bonnet for years. But this man, she touched her braid. He braided my hair like it was scripture. He made no claim. He asked nothing. And he broke silence only for me, Boone sneered. So what? That makes you his wife. Lorna's smile was steady. No, that makes me someone no man can buy. Nashkota stepped forward and said 2 words. She stays. Boone looked at the circle of spears, the fire in Lorna's eyes, the silence behind Nashkota. And he turned. No fight. No protest. Just us. As the village exhaled, Lorna's knees nearly gave out. Not because she had been protected, but because she had stood and someone had stood with her. The air changed before the flames arrived. Smoke first, thin and bitter, curling through the trees like a warning whispered in a language only the earth could speak. Then came the silence, the kind that pressed against skin, that stilled even the children. Lorna woke to shouts in Apache, boots pounding on dry ground, and the unmistakable scent of something burning. A prairie fire. Fast-moving, hungry. By the time she reached the lodge entrance, Shuya was already outside, her arms full of blankets, her voice sharp and urgent. Get the little ones to the center lodge. Go. Lorna didn't hesitate. She ran. She carried water, soaked walls, gathered baskets of herbs, and packed bundles with cornmeal and medicine roots. Her hands moved before her thoughts caught up, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she knew what to do. And she had something to protect now, not just herself. Them. She found Nashkota moving like fire itself, eyes scanning, issuing commands in few words, guiding riders, organizing lines. Lorna ran to him, breathless. What can I do? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Help Shuya. Keep the children safe. Then he pressed something into her palm, the bone comb. His eyes didn't waver. If the fire comes, this is what you carry. She understood. It wasn't just a comb, it was everything. What he had seen in her, what she had built in silence, the woman she had become. Strand by strand, she nodded, and ran. Hours passed in a blur. Smoke thickened in the sky until it swallowed the sun. Horses screamed. The heat built on the horizon like a wave of ash. Lorna tied soaked cloths around tiny mouths. She sat with 2 toddlers in her lap, whispering stories she barely remembered from childhood. Anything to keep their attention away from the trembling ground and the smell of fear. And still, Nashkota didn't return. Dusk fell. The fire was close now. The edge of the trees glowed red. Shuya knelt at the fire circle, muttering prayers under her breath, her fingers trembling. Lorna stood outside, eyes fixed on the trail. The comb clutched so tightly in her fist, her fingers had gone numb. Then, hoofbeats, riders. 4 figures, one slumped in the saddle. Her legs moved before her mind did. She ran. Nashkota's horse slowed, foam at its mouth. Nashkota slid down hard, coughing, soot streaking his chest and jaw. But he was upright, alive. Lorna reached for him, stopped, still unsure what was allowed, what was right. But Nashkota stepped closer, placed his forehead gently against hers, and breathed. No words, no claims, just presence. And in that touch, the fire inside her stilled. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. Because she wasn't the girl in the bonnet anymore. She was the woman with the feather and the braid and the fire that had not consumed her. That night, as the camp smoldered but still stood, Shuya lit a bundle of cedar and sweetgrass. The elders gathered again in a quiet circle. Lorna was summoned to the fire. She came without fear. Nashkota stood behind her, not as her shield, as her witness. Shuya took the comb from Lorna's hand and held it up to the firelight. She spoke in Apache, words that rolled like river stones. When she finished, Nashkota stepped forward and spoke only one sentence. Shuya leaned close to Lorna and whispered, he says, you didn't run. An elder woman rose, eyes like stone and smoke. She walked forward and tucked the feather deeper into Lorna's braid, then turned, spoke one word. The circle echoed it. Shuya smiled, tears in her eyes. They say, you are not ash. You are the fire that stayed. Lorna's breath hitched. She nearly dropped to her knees. But she didn't fall. Nashkota caught her elbow, not to hold, but to remind her, you're strong now, and I'm here if you need me. She looked at him, voice raw. When will I be finished? Proving myself. He brushed a smear of ash from her cheek. You already did, he said. Now it's time to live. Lorna closed her eyes, and for the first time since Texas, since her mother's last song, since the scar, since the trade, she smiled without fear. The fire was gone by morning, but its memory lingered. Thin ash settled on rooftops and river stones, clinging to every fold of fabric, every breath. The sky, once choked with smoke, now stretched clean and pale, like the land itself was exhaling. Lorna woke sore, stiff, but steady. For the first time, her body didn't feel borrowed. It felt hers. She stepped outside the lodge and found Shuya boiling honey root tea over the coals. Without words, the older woman handed her a wooden bowl and gestured toward the ridge. "He waits," she said, smiling faintly, "always there. When thoughts are heavy." Lorna didn't ask who he was. She already knew. She made the climb barefoot. The earth cooled beneath her feet. The bone comb was tucked into her waistband, not for safety, but like a talisman, her story etched into something solid, something crafted. At the top of the ridge, Neshkota stood facing the valley, arms folded. He didn't turn when she approached. She stepped beside him and stood in silence. "They say your lodge was untouched," she said quietly. He nodded. The fire curved away. She tilted her head. "Why, the land remembers who listens." His words settled in her like roots. They stood there for a long moment, not needing more. Then he pointed to a small cedar post beside a sapling. Tied to it was a thin leather cord loop. He turned to her and offered a matching leather strap. Lorna held it gently. "What is this?" "A place to hang the comb," he said. "If you choose to stay." She looked at him, her heart pressed against her ribs like it had something to say before she could. "You carved this before you met me?" she asked. He nodded. "Last winter." "I didn't know who it was for." She hesitated. "And if I said no, then it waits," he said. "As long as it takes." Lorna stepped to the post. She removed the comb from her waistband and ran her thumb over the smooth curve, over the mark that meant becoming. Her voice was soft. "Will you ever ask me to belong to you?" He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. "No," he said, "but I will ask to belong to you." The world stilled. Even the breeze paused to listen. She slid the comb through the strap and let it hang. Something inside her settled. "Then let it begin," she whispered. Neshkota stepped beside her and pressed something small into her palm, a bead carved from bone, etched with the same symbol as the comb. "Becoming," he said. "We live beside flame, but we build with ash." She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "Then we have plenty to build with." He laughed, quiet and rare. The sound startled her in the best way. That night, the tribe did not celebrate. They simply existed together. A pot of stew passed from hand to hand. Laughter sparked like flint. Children chased each other with feathers tied to sticks. A dog stole a piece of flatbread and was chased to the edge of the lodge circle. Lorna sat beside Neshkota but didn't need to lean on him. She didn't need to be touched to feel tethered. Shuya approached and placed a folded bundle on Lorna's lap, a rust-colored fabric, dyed with berries and ochre. "For your first winter," she said. "May the cold find no space in your bones." Lorna held it reverently. Later, under a sky thick with stars, she walked to the cedar post again. The comb swung gently in the night breeze. She touched it once, then reached into her pocket and placed the bead beside it on the cord, becoming not a wife, not a trade, just a woman with a name, a fist, and finally a place to be heard. A week passed. The camp began to breathe again, and Lorna realized something strange was happening. She no longer flinched when a voice rose suddenly. She no longer apologized for being seen. One morning, while gathering herbs by the water's edge with Shuya, she heard a sound that stopped her. Humming. Soft. Low. Familiar. It wasn't Shuya. It wasn't Neshkota. It was her. She was humming. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Shuya looked over and smiled knowingly. "You hear it now?" she asked. Lorna blinked. "The river." "No," Shuya said, pointing to the ground. "The song beneath your feet?" Lorna tilted her head. "The one that comes," Shuya said, "when you finally know you're not walking alone anymore." That evening, as the sky bled into dusk and the lodge fires crackled with soft purpose, Neshkota approached her quietly. He always waited until she acknowledged him. She gave a glance. He sat. In his hand was a new comb, this one carved from cedar, warm and fragrant, its teeth uneven but smoothed. He placed it gently on her knee. "It's for teaching," he said. Lorna looked down at the comb, then at him. "You want me to teach?" He nodded once. "Who else?" Both worlds." She looked across the fire at the small group of girls watching her from a distance, eyes wide, silent. They didn't see her as strange anymore. They saw her as something possible. "I don't know where to begin," Lorna said softly. Neshkota's voice was steady. "Start with a braid. That's how we begin." Too. She smiled, picked up the comb, and called to the girls. They came cautiously, one carrying a handful of grass, another with a tiny carved bead in her palm like a secret gift. Lorna reached out to the girl nearest her and gently began separating her dark hair into 3 parts. "Do you know why we braid 3? She asked. The girl shook her head. "Because the story needs 3 strands. The past, the present, and what we're still becoming." The girls leaned close. The fire crackled in rhythm. She taught them not just how to braid, but how to name their fears before each one. Say it first, she whispered to one girl who hesitated. I'm scared of being left, the girl said. Then we braid with it, Lorna answered, threading the strand gently. Fear doesn't go away, but when we hold it together, it doesn't win. Later, under a velvet night sky, Lorna walked to the post on the ridge again. The comb she had hung there still swayed in the wind. Bone white, marked with becoming. Beside it now hung the bead and a polished shell tied by someone in secret. Without ceremony, a gift, a truth. She smiled. Not all sacred things come with witnesses. As she turned to leave, Nashkota waited on the path, like he always did. He stepped forward, his voice quiet. I dreamed once that a woman would come with fire in her hair and water in her eyes. Lorna tilted her head. And she would not be pretty, he said. But she would make the world beautiful. Her breath caught. She stepped closer. That's how you saw me. He met her gaze. That's how you see yourself now. I only waited for you to arrive. She placed her palm on his chest. Steady. Then don't wait anymore. He pulled her close, not in possession, but in awe, and together they stood in the place where the land had first sunk for her, where she had been traded, where she had stayed, where she had become. It was Shuya who found it first, tangled in the reeds near the river's edge. A bonnet, sun-bleached, threadbare, the same one Lorna had arrived in. Once pulled tight over her face, she thought the world should never see. Shuya held it up gently. Lorna, she called. Lorna took it slowly, her fingers curling around the fabric. It smelled of dust and smoke and something older, her own fear, maybe her own silence. She remembered the day she first removed it. She remembered the braid. She remembered being chosen. Lorna sat by the river alone for a long while. Shuya left her to it, understanding without needing words. When Nashkota knelt beside her, she didn't look at him at first. I used to think this made me safe, she said, but I was only hiding. He didn't try to take it from her. He simply placed his hand beneath hers, cradling the bonnet, and said, Do you need it now? She shook her head. But I think I need to say goodbye. He stepped back. She walked to the river's edge and held the bonnet to her chest one last time, then knelt, not to drown it in anger, but to let it go in peace. She whispered something, a breath more than a word, and pressed the fabric beneath the water. It floated for a moment, then slipped downstream, light as an answered prayer. Behind her, Shuya sang, not a song of mourning, but a song of leaving, of release. That night, a space was cleared beside Shuya's fire. A new mat was woven, a bowl carved with Lorna's own mark, the 3-part braid she'd etched herself. Above it, hanging from a cedar peg, was the new comb, not as a relic, as a tool for teaching, for tending, for remembering. 3 girls gathered at her side that evening. They sat in a quiet circle. Tell me something you're afraid of, Lorna said. One whispered, snakes. Another, being forgotten. The smallest of them whispered, being alone. Lorna finished the braid, tied it off with a soft strip of cloth, and looked into the child's eyes. Then you start by making one strand strong. Then you find another. Then one more. And you braid them together. She paused. That's how no one stays alone. As the fire flickered and stars shimmered above them, Lorna knew the truth of it. The scar would remain. So would the feather. But the bonnet was gone. And in its place, only breath and story. And girls learning how to braid strength into themselves. Please share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Oldic Wild West stories. If a woman removed her bonnet and said, I'm not pretty, would you have braided her hair? 2. Tell us in the comments.